As for my remarks today, I want to keep it very simple. And so I have the simplest of objectives. I want to touch on four things: some bad news, some good news, a little more bad news, then some great news. So we're going to finish strong. So the first bad news we're going to keep pretty simple. And that is, as you all know, right now we're in a pretty complicated environment for addressing social problems. Okay, we know that has multiple dimensions. We've got some big, persistent social problems out there. They're not new. They've grown up over decades, despite many efforts to address them, whether we're talking about education or health or poverty. They're not necessarily bad in an absolute sense, but they're very bad in a relative sense compared to other countries. We hear the data all the time. We used to be here, we're now here. But more importantly, they're bad compared to our own aspirations and our own expectations of ourselves. In addition to that, we know we have very challenging economic circumstances. We're seeing some improvement, but still times are tough out there. And as we're confronted every day, we are seeing both at the federal and at the state and local levels unprecedented fiscal crises in terms of pressures on government finance, and these situations are not getting better. They are not grounded in the bad economy. Even as the economy improves, the federal and state financial situations will improve only modestly. They're structural. We hear this all the time, but that's in terms of our ability to get traction against our major social problems. It's going to be complicated. Okay, so much for the bad news, number one. The good news, to these challenges, we actually bring some enormous fundamental strengths. And let's start with the fact that, actually, before we start with the first fact, I want to share something with you. I'm going to refer to a Gary Larson cartoon that I saw years and years and years ago. Gary Larson, one of our most sort of insightful cartoonists, who unfortunately is now kind of retired. But I encountered this when I was a consultant for a high-tech company in Orange County, and so I saw this. So it's a picture of sort of dinosaurs, and they're in an auditorium, and they're listening raptly to this stegosaurus that's on the stage behind a podium, and the stegosaurus is very serious, and he's looking out there, and so he says, "Gentlemen, the situation looks bleak. The world's climates are changing. Mammals are taking over, and we all have a brain about the size of a walnut." Okay, so despite all of our problems, despite the economy, despite whatever mistakes we've made, opportunities we've missed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, despite climate changing, despite the fact that mammals have taken over, our brains are not the size of a walnut. We have big brains, and we can solve problems with them, and we do that all the time. But beyond that, sort of good news fact number one is we have resources. The United States of America is the biggest economy, not only in the world, in the history of the world. We have resources. Our problem is not that we have resources, which you wouldn't know from listening to the news, because all we hear from the news is how tough times are. And that's not to say that in many respects we aren't experiencing tough times. But it is not to say we don't have resources. We have the biggest economy in the history of the world. The problem is what we spend our money on, not how much money we do or do not have. And to illustrate, we hear a lot about the Chinese and all this. Well, our economy is 4 times bigger than the Chinese economy. And when we take this down to a per capita basis, believe it or not, the per capita income in China is equivalent to what the per capita income in the United States was at the end of the 19th century. Okay, so just to create some perspective, I'm not saying we have nothing to worry about. I'm saying we have resources. The question is, how do we deploy them to solve problems? And I've got some other good news there too, which is that this is the U.S. We have the longest, richest tradition of solving our own problems of any country in the world. It is that tradition that has enabled us to create the largest, most robust nonprofit sector in the world. 1.5 million nonprofit organizations, which represent fully 5% of the gross domestic product in the United States. It's $700 billion worth of economic activity. And this is the tradition that has manifested itself now in the phenomenon that we call social innovation. And this is not a new phenomenon. This is how we've solved problems throughout the history of the United States. And so we see this every day. This is what you are about, and this is what has, this is what has animated social problem solving again throughout the history of the United States. We see this today. People and communities throughout the United States solving their own problems, bounding together, create new ideas to create organizations, whether it's anti-poverty programs or health problems or ways to solve unemployment or whatever. Social entrepreneurs who think they have a better way. Many of these organizations actually do. Some of them have evidence, and these are better solutions than the kinds of solutions that come out of ivory towers, that come out of government bureaucracies, some of which are right here in Washington. Okay, the bad news number 2, we aren't getting the full benefit as a society of the social innovation that we experience as a country. That even organizations that are doing excellent work, even those that have solid evidence of results, are generally not growing to their full potential to help people. They don't serve nearly as many people as they might, and as a society, that means that we don't get the maximum benefit of the innovations that these organizations represent. And I want to share some data that was created in a study that my former colleagues at Bridgespan did a few years ago, that since 1970, this is a study in 2007, since 1970, there have been 200,000 nonprofit organizations created in the U.S. Of those 200,000, 144 have reached $50 million in size in terms of annual revenues. Now, there are a whole host of reasons for this that in the interest of time, I'm not going to get into. But that represents a problem. Certainly when we look at the private economy, that is not the case because money seeks the best solutions. The best solutions grow, the worst solutions fail. In the nonprofit sector, that does not happen. So just imagine for a moment that as a society, that we don't put more money towards social solutions. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying for the moment, imagine that we keep the same amount of money going toward social solutions, whether that's government money, nonprofit money. But imagine for the moment that that money is disproportionately going to support the best organizations, the ones that have the strongest track record of actually demonstrating results, and that those organizations are solving the maximum amount of people that they're capable of solving, and what that would mean for our communities and for our society as a whole. So, the good news, number 2, that there actually is a lot of reason to believe that we are moving in a direction that would suggest that we are increasingly going to be able to capture the benefits of the social innovation that we represent and the resources that we do deploy to the social sector. And the first thing I'd highlight is just the things that we know to be happening over the last many years that represent progress in this regard. We've seen a lot of organizations that actually are innovative organizations grow to greater scale, whether that's, some of these have become very iconic, the Teach for Americas and the City Years and the some of them, even in DC, it's the Year Ups and Habitats for Humanity down in Georgia. We're also seeing the creation of an entirely new category of funding organization like venture philanthropy, and in fact VPP is one of the best exemplars of that. We're also seeing a lot of attention to the phenomenon of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. Some of it you might say is hype, but in fact this is indicative of attention to the problem, and where you see attention, frequently you see a lot of other really productive things happening. Something else that's really important happened, and Carol referred to this, as of 2009, we saw the government of the United States, through the Obama administration, officially acknowledge social innovation as an explicit alternative strategy for attacking our social problems, in contrast to the historic top-down approach that government and institutional philanthropies have typically taken toward attacking our social problems. And this is a really significant change in government policy. Now, that's not to say that social innovation is the only way to approach problems. I'm not saying that. It is to say, however, that where we have track records of organizations that create change reliably and have evidence of doing so, that it is a powerful social strategy to put money behind those organizations to grow them to their full potential so they can serve more people and generate greater social impact as at least one major way to improve the lives of people of need in the United States of America. And that's what the administration is doing, and that is what has given rise to the Social Innovation Fund.